I've grown potatoes on my own land for over 20 years, dug them out of the dirt myself every fall, and I can tell you plainly, a real potato needs nothing done to it beyond washing off the dirt. So when I started reading the ingredient lists on the potato products sitting in most American pantries, chips, crisps, instant flakes, frozen tots, I found something that genuinely surprised even me. Several of the most popular ones on the shelf barely qualify as potato products at all, once you count what's actually in the bag. My name is Walter. I farm for a living, and today I want to walk you through exactly what I found when I lined up the most common potato products in the store and read every single label front to back, because there's a legal difference between a real potato and something engineered to look like one, and almost nobody checks which side of that line they're buying. Here's the rule, and it's the same rule I use for every product I've ever pulled apart on this channel. A real potato product needs 3 things at most: potatoes, oil if it's fried, salt, that's the entire traditional recipe for a chip, and it's the entire recipe for the potato sitting in your garden right now. Everything past those 3 ingredients is there to solve a manufacturing problem, not a potato problem. Let's start with the one that surprised me the most, and it's sitting in almost every pantry in the country. Pringles. Pick up a can and look at the first ingredient. It doesn't say potatoes. It says dried potatoes, and that phrasing exists because of an actual legal fight. In the mid-1970s, the FDA ruled that Procter & Gamble couldn't call Pringles potato chips without a disclaimer, because they aren't sliced potato at all. They're a dough made from dehydrated potato flakes, pressed into that stackable curve shape by the company's own numbers, confirmed in a UK court case that dragged on for years over how the product should be taxed. A Pringle is only about 42% potato. The rest is vegetable oil, corn flour, rice flour, wheat starch, maltodextrin, and mono, and diglycerides, all mixed into a dough, rolled flat, and cut like a cookie before it's fried. Procter & Gamble actually argued in court, on the record, that Pringles shouldn't legally count as a potato product at all, because their shape and composition weren't found in nature. They lost that argument and had to pay $160 million in back taxes. But here's the part that matters to you. They were right about the substance of the ingredients, even while arguing against their own product for tax purposes. Less than half of what's in that can ever grew in the ground. Second, instant mashed potato flakes. The box or pouch, you add hot water and butter too. Real potatoes are cooked, mashed, and dehydrated to make these, which sounds fine on its face, but check the ingredient list on most major brands, and you'll often find mono and diglycerides added to keep the texture smooth, sodium bisulfite or sodium acid pyrophosphate added specifically to stop the potato flakes from turning gray or brown during processing and storage, and sometimes BHA or BHT thrown in as a preservative to extend shelf life. None of that is technically potato. It's chemistry added to make a dehydrated product behave like fresh mashed potatoes months after it left the factory. Third, frozen hash browns and tater tots. The bag you pull out of the freezer and throw in the oven. Same sodium acid pyrophosphate shows up here constantly, again to stop the shredded or diced potato from discoloring in the freezer, plus dextrose, a sugar added to help with browning in the oven, since the natural browning process gets disrupted by freezing and thawing. Some brands add disodium dihydrogen pyrophosphate on top of that. None of it is dangerous in the amounts used, but none of it is potato either. It's there purely to make a frozen, reheated product look and behave like something fresh out of the ground. Fourth, flavored kettle chips and the loaded seasoned varieties. The barbecue, the sour cream and onion, the jalapeno version sitting next to the plain bag on the same shelf. Flip one of these over, and you'll often find a genuinely long list stacked on top of the potato: whey, monosodium glutamate, disodium inosinate, disodium guanylate, artificial colors like red 40 and yellow 5, maltodextrin, and hydrolyzed corn protein, all added purely for flavor and color. None of it something you'd find in an actual potato. The plain, unflavored bag sitting right next to it from the same brand is frequently just potatoes, oil, and salt, 3 ingredients. Nothing more, which tells you the potato itself was never the problem. The flavor packet stacked on top of it is what dragged the ingredient list out to 20 items. Fifth, frozen French fries from the grocery freezer aisle. A lot of these carry the same sodium acid pyrophosphate for color, plus dextrose for browning, and some also include a light coating of rice flour or modified corn starch to help them crisp evenly in the oven, since a home oven doesn't fry the way a commercial deep fryer does. Reasonable enough for the result they're going for, but again, every one of those additions is there to compensate for the freezing and reheating process, not to make the fry taste more like an actual potato. Sixth, boxed, scalloped, and au gratin potato kits, the ones with a seasoning packet included. These typically start from dehydrated potato slices, the same category as the instant flakes, and then add a cheese sauce packet built from milk powder, modified food starch, and artificial cheese flavoring rather than real cheese, since real cheese doesn't hold up well to months on a shelf at room temperature the way a powdered substitute does. Here's what I found that actually passed clean, and it's worth knowing because it proves the additive-heavy versions aren't the only option. They're just the cheaper and more shelf-stable one. Plain classic potato chips from most major brands, the original unflavored bag, not the seasoned varieties, typically list exactly 3 ingredients: potatoes, oil, and salt. That's the whole recipe, no different from what you'd fry in your own kitchen. Fresh or frozen plain potatoes with nothing added. Whole, diced, or shredded with no seasoning packet, no coating, are exactly what they say they are because there's nothing to preserve or dress up if you're going to cook them yourself right away. And any potato you grow, buy from a farmer's market, or pick up whole from the produce section is obviously the cleanest version of all, since nothing's been done to it beyond washing off the dirt. I want to be fair here, the same way I try to be every time I do one of these. None of what I found is illegal, and in reasonable amounts, none of it is something to panic over. A can of Pringles isn't going to hurt you eating it occasionally. What bothers me isn't that these additives exist. It's that a product built mostly from corn, flour, rice flour, and wheat starch gets to sit in the potato chip aisle, priced close to actual potato chips, marketed with a picture that makes you assume you're buying something that came out of the ground when less than half of what's actually in the can did. Here's why this keeps happening, and it's the same story every time. Real potatoes are seasonal, they're heavy, they're perishable, and they cost more to process into a shelf-stable product than a dough built from cheap corn and rice flour, with a small percentage of dehydrated potato mixed in for flavor and legal cover. A company chasing the lowest cost per unit and the longest shelf life is always going to reach for starch and preservatives before it reaches for more actual potato, because potato is the expensive, perishable ingredient in that equation, and starch is cheap and stable. So here's what I want you to do next time you're standing in that aisle. Flip over whatever potato product you normally buy and read the first 3 ingredients specifically, because that's where the bulk of the product lives. If potato or potatoes is sitting first on the list with nothing but oil and salt behind it, you're looking at the real thing. If you see corn flour, rice flour, wheat starch, or maltodextrin sitting ahead of or right alongside the word potato, you're looking at something engineered to taste and look like a potato product without actually being mostly potato. And if the can or box doesn't say potato at all and instead says dried potatoes or potato flakes buried down the list behind several other starches, that phrasing is doing a lot of quiet work to avoid making a claim the product can't legally back up. I'll leave you with the wider point because it's the one that keeps showing up no matter what aisle I'm standing in. The same trick that let a can of mostly corn and rice flour sit in the potato chip aisle for 50 years plays out across half the grocery store, a product built from cheap filler ingredients dressed up with the name and the picture of the real thing it's replacing, priced close enough to the genuine article that most people never think to check. Once you get in the habit of reading the first 3 ingredients on anything before it goes in your cart, you start seeing this pattern everywhere, not just with potatoes. Tell me in the comments which of these you had sitting in your own pantry before today. I read every one of these, and I'd genuinely like to know how many of you had no idea Pringles was legally forced into calling itself a crisp instead of a chip because of exactly this issue. And if you grow your own potatoes or know a good local farm stand near you, drop it in the comments, because nothing on this list beats a potato that came straight out of the ground a few days ago. Next time, I want to do the same test on frozen pizza crusts, because what's hiding in some of those ingredient lists is longer than anything I covered today. Until then, read the first 3 ingredients before you trust the picture on the front. And remember, if a farmer wouldn't recognize it as food, it probably isn't.